good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are. I'm Liz Fernandez with Professional People Training, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Before we begin, we want to make this as interactive as we can. So we're going to ask you to either raise your hand and ask a question during the presentation. You can put questions in the chat. Brandon, our speaker, is going to throw out some questions for you to answer either on the chat or verbally. So we just want to make sure that you have the opportunity to keep this moving as far as being able to have questions answered. So our speaker today is Brandon Deppenbush. Brandon is the Vice President of Cattle Feeding for Ear Sick and Doll Feed Services, Incorporated. Since graduating from Kansas State University in 2009, he spent 15 years in the cattle feeding industry. His primary role is to support the overall cattle feeding operations of his company. Over the years, he has participated in many large-scale research studies in the production setting. He's been involved in many state and national efforts supporting secure beef supply and U.S. cattle trace initiatives. His mission is clear: to build people. There's nothing more rewarding than creating a nutritious, safe, and wholesome beef product and helping people discover their leadership capacity. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brandon.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. And Liz, thank you again for helping organize this. You're a pro and you've done a great job at this. My name is Brandon Deppenbush, as Liz mentioned. I work for Ersic and Doll Feed Services. Our company headquarters is located in Cimarron, Kansas. So those that may not be familiar with it, that's right down around Dodge City, Garden City. The core of our business is cattle feeding. We have 7 different feed yards or farms, if you will, in the southwest quadrant of the state of Kansas. If you look, depends how people rate it, but we're probably in size-wise, as far as capacity, we're probably somewhere around top 5 in the nation as far as total size. But if you look at it on a customer basis, we're probably the #1 cattle feeder, custom cattle feeder, customer clientele, if you will, in the United States, and maybe even bigger than that. So we're awfully proud of both of those. So it's great to be with you today. My goals are pretty simple, and I don't want to be too simple, but I really just want to kind of go over what a feed yard is for those who may don't know. I really want to tie that into how that plays into foreign animal disease preparedness. I think Liz did an excellent job of setting us up for today. That I personally really like to have the interaction. So it's either the raise a hand or the chat, or please feel free just to jump in and interrupt me. So we'll try to break up the presentation to try to pull those conversations out as we go along. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and jump here into our first slide. Here's kind of the outline I want to cover today. I want to talk about kind of the business model. What's the business side of the feed yard? What does that look like? Talk about the organizational structure. How is the feed yard organized? Roles and responsibilities. I was asked to talk a little bit about the inputs and outputs of a feed yard. What comes in, what goes out. We're going to talk a little bit about just some generic disease risk factors. What are some of the generic diseases that we do see? And then wrap up to this morning with just foreign animal disease preparedness and kind of get more of my perspective on that. I think the first thing to do, especially for those who may not necessarily know the beef supply chain, is to go through the beef supply chain or the cattle supply chain and talk about where we sit in that. This is the live side, if you will, the beef supply chain. It starts here on the top with the seed stock purebred producers. Those organizations, those companies would build the breeding stock. So they would build the foundation bulls and heifers that would eventually become cows. So they basically create the genetics that's in our industry. The second step is the cow-calf. That's probably one of the bigger parts of our the cattle supply chain, the beef supply chain. And that's the mommies and the daddies and the babies. So that's where all the calves are born. And that is really starts the process for us in the feed yard sector. Now I have it drawn here nice and neat and pretty, but it doesn't necessarily always flow this way. But the rancher, the cow-calf producer, at times would take his calves to an auction market or a sale barn, depending on your terminology and where you're at. And the reason I think I want to spend a little bit of time on this, if you think about it from a disease transmission standpoint, this is the time where these naive calves are coming from an individual rancher, cow-calf guy out in the middle of nowhere, now all of a sudden coming into a barn, a place, if you will, kindergarten. You take your kids to kindergarten, you know what happens with all, they like to share their diseases. That happens right there at the auction market and sale barn. There may be buyers right from the feed yard. Feed yard may buy directly from the auction market, or there may be a stocker or a background or another segment in our industry that will come in there and buy some of those younger calves, most likely, and take them to their place and either grow them on pasture, grow them in a dry lot setting with more of a high roughage type ration. They may get sold again, commingled again in a sale barn, and then ultimately they land at our feed yard. The feed yard is the last step in the live animal side of the beef industry. So from the feed yard, they go to the packer, and that's when they get transformed from, animals into the beef supply chain. So I think this is a good place, and we'll see how. I wish I was in a live room. It's easier to interact with that, but maybe I'll just pause just a second. And is there any questions about kind of how the beef supply chain works that anybody wants to come off mute and talk about? Ask. And that's okay. I'll give you a pass now, but I won't give you a pass later, because I really want you to be thinking of some questions that come up as we go along, because it'll be such a more enjoyable process if we can have that dialogue. So let's talk a little bit about the business model. When I talk to people that don't necessarily know the feed yard industry very well, I think a really good analogy is just a bed and breakfast for cattle. So we rent a room, if you will, a pen to the client, whoever the client may be, and then we provide them meals. In the second bullet point there, company versus customer ownership, this is really a point that I hit on right at the beginning, but I really want to dive into a little bit now, more deeper now. As I mentioned, I said we're probably maybe top 5 in size, physical size of our company within the U.S., but on the customer ownership side, so people that don't own the cattle that send to us, we would, I think there's no doubt we're number 1 with that customer base. So what does that mean? That means that any one of you, if you want to get in the cattle industry, you can buy cattle from the sale barn, from the stocker, from the rancher, however you want to do it, and send them to us, to our bed and breakfast, and then we will take care of those cattle. Down here in the bottom half of the slide here, talk about the services that we provide. Obviously, we'll provide health care to the animals, whether that be processing, vaccination protocols, and then also treat cattle. Cattle do get sick, and we have our responsibility to treat those cattle. With the healthcare side of things, at least once a month, most likely twice a month, we have a visit from a consulting veterinarian that oversees all of our production practices and treatment protocols, and then also does training for our on-site people. Nutrition-wise, also we provide a well-balanced ration. We need that for the cattle to grow and to put on the finish that we want. Once a month, we'll have a consulting nutritionist as well that comes in, and he or she provides oversight of the nutritional program and training as well. The marketing side of things, we can market cattle, so when the cattle leave here, they can go to, what's unique about our company is they can go to any one of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different packers. So it's our specialty to be able to align your cattle, the type of cattle that you have, with the specific packer that will earn you the biggest return on your investment. We'll also provide risk management, the futures market from the Chicago Mercantile, and then we also provide financing for the cattle side, buying of the cattle, and then finance for the feed as well. So as you can see within that slide there, there's a bunch of different elements from the business side of the feed yard and how they work. I think the next slide here, what I want to drive home on that is the size and the magnitude of the feed yard. So for those of you, hopefully most of you can see the screen, hopefully you see my little red dot. And knowing Kansas, everything out here is broken up in 1 mile sections. So from right here, from the top left, from there to there is basically a mile. From there down to here is a mile. And this would be a fairly average size feed yard, not an exceptionally large one, but a fairly average size one. So this, I mean, it's not huge, I get that, but it's still the magnitude and the size of it is still pretty large, especially when we start thinking about, we talk about bird flu, right? How do you keep birds out of something like this? I know birds weren't necessarily associated with feed yards, but you think about any number of pests that could get in there to bring diseases. If I will, before I go on and do too much here, I think maybe we got a question here, which will be good. You'll see kind of these little ponds here on the screen here. These would be our lagoon system. So there's environmental regulations that we fall on. So every drop of rain that lands on the feed yard needs to drain and be collected into these ponds. And then from there, the liquid phase of the manure will get pumped out, and you kind of see these round circles here to be what we call dewatered and used as nutrients and fertilizer for the farmers. So let me pause a little bit, Liz, and let's take a question.
Yes, so we have a couple questions in the chat. The first one is, multiple owners means multiple health statuses and widespread origins. How does this impact how feedlot management thinks about FMD prevention and response?
Yeah, well, you got to my last slide. We can go right to that, but that's the reason I wanted to drive home that point, is to talk about those risk factors that we have, and they're ginormous. We have a very transient population in our feed yards, so every day, at least every week, but just about every day, there's animals coming in and animals coming out. And I would say that we pretty much take cattle from every state in the union except, Hawaii and Alaska, but the majority of the other states we'll get cattle from at any given time. And we may get cattle from, let's say, Oklahoma City, the large sale barn, Oklahoma City. Well, to the question is, that group of cattle that we brought into our feed yard may be a combination of 4 or 5 different ranchers that come together, so they got commingled there. So from a disease traceback standpoint, it's almost scary in my mind.
The next question is, what is the average cost per head/pen for this service?
Say that one more time.
What is the average cost per head or /pen for this service?
Okay, yep. So the business side of things, we basically charge in 3 different ways. So let's go back to the bed and breakfast model. So we'll charge a room rate, which we'll call yardage, and that can range anywhere from 5 cents to 6 cents to 30 cents per head day. So for every animal per day, we'll charge anywhere from 6 to 20 cents. We do 6 cents yardage, so that would be the room rate or to rent the room. And then on the feed margin side, that's where we sell the feed. That's where we'll make our margin. So we'll cover our costs and we'll charge markup on that. So everybody's a little different in that, and everybody gets pretty competitive on that. But if you look at it on a cost of gain basis, for every pound of gain that the animal puts on our feed yards right now, we're anywhere from $1 to $1.50, depending on the type of animal, for every pound that the animal gets.
The next question is, how are the cattle cohorted? Is it by age or age and breed or age and destination processing or another combination?
Well, the first way that they would be put together is by ownership. So we'll keep ownership together, so within their ownership. But what I like to have is ownership sent in a big group of cattle. This map on the screen here, and I'll come back to the question, don't let me forget, but within that screen there we look at, there's roughly 300 pens or 250 pens there. They range in size from the smallest, maybe 60 animals per pen, to the biggest, maybe 300 head animals per pen. So we have a bunch of different sizes that fit customer needs. But if you get a big customer that comes in with a big group of cattle, what you do like to do is maybe what I call size them up. So put the big ones in this pen, put the small ones in this pen, and really that facilitates the marketing side of the process when we get to the end, that we have more of a uniform type animal to market in similar marketing groups.
Great. The next question is, you mentioned the intermingling of cattle in their travels before arriving at the feedlot. Are they tracked at each location so you can trace if there's an issue?
No. There's people on the call that know more about disease traceability than I do, but no, we have some huge gaps in our industry on the feeder side of things. All what I know, sometimes I don't even know our guys, and we got great managers at each location that handles the customer side of things, but they don't even know, cattle will just show up. This is a good point to talk about here. A truck will show up at a feed yard, back up there and say, hey, we got cattle for you, and the manager's like, what? Who, where do they come from? And the truck driver has been up for however many hours, he's kind of high on Red Bull. I don't know, they come out of Virginia. And so then you don't even know where these cattle come from. So this is the reality, and I think as disease investigators are probably out there on the call to understand that that happens. And it takes a little bit to figure out just where did he come, where did he load these animals.
That's a really good issue to talk about. The next question is, can you go into more detail on your customer ownership versus company ownership? Is this a common practice for raising feeders?
In the feed yard industry, so raising feeders is some of those earlier segments in the supply chain. If we talk about just the feed yard side of things, there are some of those really large companies, cattle feeding. Remember, I'm talking cattle feeding, cattle feeders, people that finish fat cattle to make cattle fat and get them ready for harvest. There's really, most people probably do a combination of both. And when I say company cattle, so we as our company, Ursic and Dahl, we do own a very small amount of cattle that we own ourselves. So we are our own customers. So we'll charge ourselves our own yardage, our own feed markup, et cetera, et cetera. But we really pride ourselves on the customer, whether it be the individual rancher, the investor type. There's investors, people that just invest in cattle. There are a lot of large organizations that they are 100% company owned, so they don't have any customers. That does simplify it a little bit because then you don't have to deal with all these customer relations and all that type of stuff. So it's just how you structure your business and how we've been structured for since the beginning, 1967.
Okay, the last question we have in the chat is, how long could a feed yard hold cattle if a stop movement order was in place?
Yeah. Well, wow, that's a you know, on an easy answer would be is, I mean, if the stuff hits the fan, I mean, it could be indefinitely, but that's not the ideal situation. All these animals have an expiration date on them, if you will, and you just can't just turn off the production process. You just can't turn off the growing process for an animal, and they get to a point where they're too big for even harvesting. So yeah, if stuff hit the fan, I mean, you could do it forever. But if it's in the ideal situation, I'd say, you know, when we went through the Tyson fire that we had a handful of years ago, that showed us that we could hold cattle for basically a month and not risk too much. So somewhere in there is probably the real answer, but I think it just depends. Let me move forward a little bit, Liz. Thank you all. This is what I want. Let's go a handful of slides, and then we'll regroup again, and we'll come back for some more questions. So keep them coming in to Liz. This slide here, it may not mean much to you, but I think it might be important just to understand how a typical feed yard is organized. We have the general manager at the top that's over everything, and their responsibility would, A, oversight of the whole operations, but B, in our company, heavy on the customer relations side. The office manager on the right also would have a customer relations role, visiting with the customers, delivering what they need. Underneath the office manager, then we just have our clerical staff that helps keep all the records straight. On the left-hand side of the screen is the operations assistant manager side. You'll see here, based on my red dot, we basically have 4 different departments. We have a feed department. Their responsibility is delivering feed to the animals in the pens. We have the mill department. The mill is in charge of actually batching the feed, so that's where the kitchen is, so that's the chef. So they take all the individual feed components, make them together to create feed that we give to the feed supervisor and his feed trucks, and then they deliver it to the cattle. The cattle supervisor, that department is responsible for everything cattle-wise. Accounting, health, processing, shipping, you name it. If it has to deal specifically with the animal, the cattle supervisor manages that. and then we have our maintenance department that keeps everything running. So I think that gives you an idea of the structure, the way feed yards are somewhat laid out. Every feed yard is not the same, but nevertheless, every feed yard has these responsibilities. So either one or more people have to do those. We kind of have it broken out in different departments, if you will. Go a couple more slides, and then we'll pause for some questions, hopefully. I was asked to talk about the inputs of the feed yard, and they're fairly simple. Feeder cattle, so that's the smaller size animal that comes into the feed yard. The average weight coming into the feed yard would probably be right around 700 pounds. That may range from the low side of 350 pounds, which is really light, to 1,000 pounds, maybe even a little bigger than that. But the average would be right there around 700 pounds. So that's the biggest input that we get to the feed yard. And we add feed. Feed would be corn, wheat perhaps, silage, haylage, alfalfa, any type of a roughage, any type of a salad, any type of that. The roughage side of things is extremely important for the gut health of the animal. And the corn is really what makes it grow. We do feed a source of fat. We feed a plethora of vitamins and minerals. Proteins. We'll also feed protein as well. Water, obviously, is everything needs water. We provide all the healthcare products, vaccine, antibiotic if need to be, parasiticide, you name it. Labor, the labor of love. Our people are what makes the difference with the animals to get them to grow efficiently and healthily. And then there's not many secret ingredients, but I would consider the secret ingredient of anything, no matter what you do, but certainly with what we do, is consistency. And as an example, our goal is to feed every pen of cattle within 20 minutes, plus or minus 20 minutes every day. So we measure the accuracy of the ration, how consistent is the protein from bite to bite within that bite the animal takes. The timing, we talked about that. If we're supposed to deliver them 1,000 pounds of feed to the bunk, how close did we get? Everything is about consistency and timing. The cattle very much get into a routine, and consistency, as I firmly believe, is a secret ingredient. Let's go one more slide, and then we'll pause for questions. Let's talk about the outputs, the basic outputs of the feed yard. Obviously, beef in the form of walking cattle, finished cattle that leave, that'll go to the processing plant. That's what we're in business to do, is to create beef. So that's the number one. The number two items is the co-products, if you will, the manure in the form of liquid and solids. We talked a little bit about the liquids before from the ponds. We would also have solids in the form of solid manure. And those are two components as we think about disease preparedness. We talk about stop movement order, which would include both of those. Those create some complexity because we basically create all three of those products every day. So let's pause there, Liz, and look like maybe we had some questions come through.
We do. We have questions coming through the chat, but also remember, you can also raise your hand and, use it. You have a verbal question. So let's start with the chat. How likely would these feed yards be? How likely would these feed yards be to accept cattle that were in transit in the event of a stop movement order?
Hit me one more time, Liz.
So how likely would these feed yards be able to accept cattle that were in transit in the event of a stop movement order?
Okay. So yeah, I laid out some extreme examples where cattle show up at your doorstep and you don't know about it. That happens more than you think. I mean, it probably happens, I bet it could happen once a week, perhaps, at our locations, but the overwhelming majority of customers are respectful, because we're full most of the time. If the bed and breakfast is full and they send the cattle, it's like, what are we going to do with them? So I'd say the majority of the cattle are planned in advance, so we know that they're going to arrive on Tuesday in the afternoon or Monday in the morning or whatever the case may be. So the majority of the cattle would be expected, and we would be able to call an audible. I'm fairly new to this company, so we haven't got this far down in our secure beef or just our contingency planning. But what I'd like to be able to do is have where's going to be the place that we drop these cattle, because if we get the stop movement order There's going to be a grace period in there that the cattle will be allowed, if they're already on the road, to go on to their destination. Do I, Brandon, really want to put my whole feed yard at risk by dropping those cattle in, or do I find a place where I can kind of offload those? So those are all factors that we would want to think about on our end.
The next question is, going back to the comment about shipments coming in, this follows this question, and you might not be aware of, would you ever turn those shipments away if you couldn't identify their order?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. The people that do this are, and I hope none of these customers are on the line, if so, I apologize deeply, but they're just disrespectful. So it's the same clowns that do it. I shouldn't even call them clowns. The same people, that's their way of forcing our cattle into the feed yard. So it's not going to be some random person. It's going to be already existing customer. And so that's the thing I need to address on the customers. We have some customers that are always in the market. They're always marketing the pen and sending the pen, marketing the pen and sending the pen. So these aren't just random characters we've never met before. They're existing customers, but they don't have the common courtesy to give us the heads up on those. But we have to go figure out which customer it is that's not very courteous. But to your answer, yes, if we didn't know where they are, because good night, it happens. We're out here in Garden City, Kansas, and within 50 miles of here, I don't know how many feed yards there'd be, but there'd be a bunch. Sometimes a trucker just gets to the wrong place, and you don't want to take the wrong cattle. They're expected to go to one of our competitors down the road. So, yeah, if we don't know where they come from, we're not going to unload them. It just may take time to figure out who they are.
Next question is, would organic cattle go through a feed yard? If so, is there something different you have to do on a management side for them?
Yeah, that map that I showed you all on the screen there is actually one of our feed yards that we do natural cattle. So we don't do, I don't say there's not such a thing, but I don't think there's such a thing as organic cattle. But natural cattle, there is. It's tomato, kind of the same language. But yes, there are definitely production practices that get different. You have to use a different feed truck for those cattle. Obviously, the type of products that get used with those animals, they can't be treated. If they do get treated, they get pulled out of the natural program. They get marketed separately. And then, we're held accountable. We have a company like IMI Global that would come in and audit our practices and make sure we're doing what we say that we do. So, yeah, there are some differences. And it makes it a challenge. Not just everybody can do it. You got to have your I's dotted and T's crossed.
The next question is, do you require cattle to have official ID, disease tests, or vaccination prior to accepting? If they arrive on site without a protocol in place to implement the above, and how quickly could you perform a trace out of a load that arrived at your site?
Well, I don't think I understood the beginning of the question, but I'll clarify that we don't expect animals to show up with an official ID. In fact, maybe this is a surprise to everybody on the call, and I guess if it is, I'm glad I'm the one that can bring it to you, but crying out loud, 95% of the cattle show up, if not higher than that, come to our place naked. They have no ID. They're just naked as can be. They have no ID. So that would take a long time to trace them back with no ID, where they got commingled from, because a load of cattle may hold 100 head, let's call it 100 head, and you'd have no idea of those 100 head. That might have been 10 animals from 10 different ranchers that got put together on that truck. You just have there's no way of knowing. So if I can put a plug in here for, and there's probably people on the line that don't talk about cattle trace, but there's a group of producers and people that are coming together to try to create what that disease traceability system would look like for these classes of cattle, for these feeder cattle. And uscattletrace.org would be where you'd be able to find more on that if you don't know much about our mission.
So I don't know if we answered this question, but the one part of it was, how quickly could you perform a trace out of a load?
I can't. They're naked. I could trace them back to the cell barn, but then past the cell barn. I shouldn't say it's impossible. It could be done with a big cheap tablet and some crowns and a lot of time, but it's. Speed of commerce, we ain't gonna be able to do it very quickly.
Okay. The next question is, would dead stock be significant in terms of output?
Say that again.
Would dead stock be significant in terms of output?
Yeah, I should be a smart aleck and say we don't have dead cattle, but that's a good point. That's an overlooked point. So that is definitely an output that leaves the feed yard, and that's well placed, whoever mentioned that. So yeah, we have to, in a disease outbreak, how do you manage those? Do you compost them? Right now, the normal practice, the general practice is use a rendering service. So a truck comes in that stops at a bunch of different farms, picks up other dead animals, comes into your place, and all of our secure beef supply plants, the first phase we still might use a rendering truck, but the deads are away, we take them to a place away from the feed yard so to minimize the risk, but that would definitely be an output. Hopefully that's not a big output, but it would be an output.
The next question we might have answered, how different is organic feedlot cattle and do you segregate? I think we talked about this before.
Yep, we will segregate them because they can't be fed together. From an operational standpoint, if you remember back at that map there, we would typically have an alley, what I'm going to call an alley or a row of pens, a group of pens reserved for natural cattle, and it's really just from a logistics of delivering feed. You don't want to have to deliver a package to a house in Washington, D.C., and then deliver a package to Denver, Colorado, and then back to Chicago. You want to kind of group them together. So the same thing in a feed yard. We try to group those like pens together on that feed route. So, but yeah, they'll be managed differently. They'll be handled differently. But mainly some of where they're actually placed, where they live in a feed yard is based off just logistics.
Okay, and this is another question about deads. How do you handle your deads? If composting is that and output for you, or use them on farm fields you own?
Yeah, we don't, the current organization where I'm at right now, we do not do any composting of deads. In my previous experiences, we have done a little bit of composting of deads. What I like to tell people is if you're going to compost deads, you need to make it serious, and you probably almost need to put another department on that screen, that organizational chart, because you've got to manage at that level. Because if you don't, you're not going to decompose all the bones, you know, the big old hip bones and that type of stuff. And farmers don't particularly like to have sharp bones spread out on their field. And this makes really good compost, really good fertilizer, but you really got to manage the moisture and then the carbon and other components in the composting process.
So we have a little scenario here for you. Say you have a load of cattle from producer X that come in and immediately get sick, presumably from their origin herd or exposure at a market. And then a few days later, cattle in a nearby pen owned by producer Y break out with the same kind of thing. Does this ever become a liability issue for the feed yard or the clients, and how would those disputes be handled?
Well, you can never prove where they got sick. The owner of the animal may say, oh no, they got sick on your place, and we do spend time with that, because if the animals show up at our place and we got to start pulling cattle day 1, day 2, it's like, now come on, they arrive with disease pressure on them. If it's day 15, 16, 20, something like that, it's like, well, they might have picked something up here. As far as disease disputes or disputes on that deal, it's good question and not a good answer. And typically it's something we don't have to deal with very much. But you'll get customers that'll be a little bit grouchy. It's like, dang, I sent them to you and they died on day 1. It's like, man, it takes time for this to happen. It's how can that be our fault? And but I think the question that they're, well, I don't want to perceive what question they're getting at, but talk about this pen gets sick and then the next pen gets sick, especially if we talk about this big scary disease. How do we have our team ready and ready to quickly diagnose what that disease is? The next slide here we're going to talk about is just kind of as disease risk factors, but common diseases we would have would be bovine respiratory disease. And yeah, I'm sure there's disease spread in our feed yards. I know that there is. This guy isn't smart enough to measure that, to be able to see that. It is get pretty pretty difficult in the population that we have. So Liz, let's hold up. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I have one more question. When you have shipments of cattle coming from out of state, do they typically come with an interstate certificate of veterinary inspection?
Yep. Supposed to. Yep. And there was, they're supposed to. And if they don't arrive, then we're supposed to organize that. So yeah, that 100% right. They're supposed to. Key word there.
Okay.
Supposed
All right.
to.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to let you take it back up.
Let's talk about just some disease factors here. We've already hit on a lot of these. We talked about the transient population, cattle arriving and leaving daily. The cattle arrive from multiple states and multiple locations. They're commingled before arrival. The previous health and rearing status is unknown. Environmental, I want to talk about that last bullet point later, but all those first bullet points are really what we already talked about. We don't know the history of those animals. We certainly know who owns them most times. There's some exceptions. And we may know that they were bought at Oklahoma Sale Barn. But outside of that, you don't know. But these are risk factors for either dare I say, generic diseases that we have, or the potential of spread of the foreign animal diseases. The last bullet point here is specific to just how these feed yards operate. Environmental exposure. That's really why I wanted to throw that big map up there. That map just showed that we're exposed to flies, skunks, everything, every type of animal, birds, and somebody wants to do us harm. Our borders, if you will, to use that terminology, we have fairly porous borders. So, meaning entry points into the feed yard. Part of our secure beef supply plan, when that happens, you really lock down the borders, lock down the entry points where you have to. So we just have one entry point. As we go along here, really trying to encourage all of our yards and others within the industry to really tighten up our border anyhow, so just anybody just can't come in there. Most people that come in there would be customers coming to see their cattle, but they need to go through a process of checking in and making sure that we don't have any bad characters that want to do harm to our cattle. I was asked to talk a little bit about the common feed yard diseases. I'm not a veterinarian, and you're going to figure that out really quickly. But the three main diseases that we would face would be, number one, by far and above, is bovine respiratory disease, and all its different factions that come with that. Digestive, we talked about, that's the reason we add hay and roughage to the rations, is to try to keep the digestive system happy. Sometimes I think bovine respiratory diseases, they're pulled for that, or they're treated for that, but it's actually just an upset stomach from a digestive upset, which comes back to that secret ingredient of consistency. Consistency will help us alleviate some of those digestive upsets. Skeletal diseases, muscular diseases, foot rot, lameness type stuff, maybe even injuries would probably be our number 3 disease. And then there's all kinds of different other diseases, but these would certainly be the most common ones. I think we're talking about disease. Let's go to, basically this is going to be my last slide here. You guys have been awesome and keep the questions coming. This has been good for me.
Okay.
Foreign animal disease preparedness, I put the FAD.
Can I grab my glass? I'll go ahead and get my drink.
Yeah, go ahead. Get your drink. Get me one too. I put on the foreign animal disease as a foreign thought. Meant to be a little bit of play on words, but also meant to be serious. That I'd say a majority, I don't know what percent would say, but the majority of people in production agriculture, when you talk about foreign animal disease, it's just a foreign thought. They're like, whatever, I don't know what you're talking about. That's like China or something. That's a long way from here. So it is a foreign thought. I don't think people understand the risk that they have and the consequences that would occur to our industry should we have a foreign animal disease. Ignorance is bliss. It won't happen here. It's just I'd say the majority of the people out here where you would eventually be doing disease investigations are ignorant. And ignorance not being stupid, it's just not knowing. We talked a little bit about the complex supply chain. That's what I wanted to try to get down in that bullet point we started with, the purebred, all the way down to Feedyard, if you remember that bullet point list, that there are a number of participants. There are a number of animals, number of people that own an animal throughout its lifetime. The other complexity of our supply chain is the size of participants. The overwhelming majority of the cow-calf producers, the mommy and daddy that make the baby calves for us to feed, they're pretty small. A lot of them are just hobby farmers, and some of you may fall in that group as well. So just a huge number of participants. The distribution of these participants, I mean, they are all over every nook and cranny of this country, and some of them don't want you to know where they're at. And then I think the final bullet point there that goes all the way back to the Old West days is just our independent nature in the cattle industry of all the participants. We are very independent. You're not going to tell us what to do. And not only that, we're not going to share our information up and down the supply chain. So that's part of, somebody may not want me at the feed yard to know the health problems that they had at their farm. They just want to get those stupid things out of there because they're tired of dealing with them. And then they get to us and they're like, oh, what, they're dying? What? And they act all surprised. But in all reality, they've probably been fighting this, whatever's going on in that herd for quite a while. So those are some thoughts that I have on preparedness. Are we ready? I think the big answer is no. What are the disease risk factors? You've already seen this slide, but as we talk about foreign animal disease, these would be our risk factors that we have, whether it be a generic disease or a foreign animal disease. So, you know, we are really doing well on time here. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast. That ends my slide, so let's keep the questions going. And thank you all for the questions. Keep them coming.
So here's our first question in the chat. And remember, you can also ask a verbal question. In your experience, is it common practice for feed yards to have truck washes or other ways to clean and disinfect vehicles coming on and off the property?
No, I'd say the only thing that would be the most common, I can't speak with certainty because I haven't been everywhere, but it's not common. But the thing that would be common is a place where a truck can, what I'm gonna call dump their, because all the cattle trucks that haul cattle, they kind of have a place where the liquid and the manure kind of collect. So there'd be places where they can open up their traps back into one of those ponds, if you will, open up what they call the trap or the door on the trailer to drain that. But are we set up with large washing stations? Absolutely not. But part of our secure beef supply plan is if anything crosses that moat or our line of separation, that we have a place to wash, clean, and disinfect those vehicles. But boy, howdy, we need to make that minimal because that'll be a huge undertaking.
The next question is, how are the pens cleaned between groups of cattle?
Yep, and they're not necessarily clean between every group of cattle. We try to, that's the goal. But it's an ongoing basis. So each pen would probably get cleaned, depending on the weather and circumstances. But the bare bone minimum, 3 to 4 times a year, they'll get cleaned. If it's a wetter year or we have more animals in the pen, we may clean it more than that. We do try to clean it between groups of cattle just to get them prepared. Sometimes work just gets away from us. We can't do that. But how it's done, it's physically done with the tractor and then a piece of equipment we drag behind it, just we call it, I'm drawing a blank now, a drag, a box blade. We just mechanically drag it up into a pile, take a loader, we stack it up into a pile, and then we load those piles into a truck, and then we haul them out to our compost site or to a field for spreading.
Okay, so Sarah, you have your hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
I had a question, and I don't know if you necessarily have an answer right now, but maybe something to think about is, so I'm part of the Department of Ag here in Oregon, one of those people that deals with disease response. And so I guess my question for you, as part of the production industry, what you had mentioned that FAD is a foreign thought, that people don't think about it, that it's out of sight, out of mind. Is there anything that those that deal with disease response on the government side or maybe the cattle association side can do to spread the word and get get feed yards to be thinking about it. Again, you don't necessarily need to have an answer right now, but I just thought I'd put that out there. Like, is there anything we as disease response officials can do to help that sector of our industry?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you know my buddy Wes Killian up there at Beef Northwest and you see him, make sure you tell him hi for me. That is a really, it's an interesting question. And I would have really thought that COVID, you would really think that something like COVID would open your eyes to this, and us as producers, we'd say, well, that's interesting. That's not a foreign human disease. Well, I guess it's a foreign disease that come to our country and how fast it spread, that would open the eyes to us in the livestock industry. During that time, there was quite a bit of talk. There was more talk than we've had before on that, and an awareness. I don't know how you'd talk about that without crying wolf. And people say, well, you're just crying wolf. That can't happen. I don't know. I mean, we need to talk to a psychologist on that, because that is how we get to that point. Great question. I don't know how to do it.
Right, thanks. We have another question. Has the HPAI in dairy raised awareness of risk of an FAD in beef industry?
Yeah, so let's mush those two questions together. If it wasn't COVID, which had to do with people, now we've got HPAI that got in at least dairy cattle. Between the two of those, we should be like, well, this is really interesting. But yes, that has created some awareness in our industry. Certainly, definitely on the dairy side of things, I would say the larger operators, maybe that other question that was there, I would say a lot of the larger organizations, feed yards that is, and even dairies, but let's just talk feed yards, would probably have a higher sense of awareness to these type of things. But understand, like I told you, I didn't tell you this, we would anywhere about 250, 260,000 animals at any given time and across all our farms. That's how many we would have. But all those animals are owned mostly by other people. So our customer base, I mean, you can only imagine a number of different customers that we have at any given time coming or going. So all of those people that send cattle to us, they're really small, they're disconnected from they're a little bit further away from the packer and USDA and such. They would be the ones that are probably even more, when I use the word foreign, would apply probably more to those.
Okay, here's the next question. What is your biggest message to your peers on mitigations they could accomplish if FMD got into the United States?
Say it one more time, please.
What is your biggest message to your peers on mitigations they could accomplish if FMD got into the United States?
Yeah. Well, I got to mention cattle trace. Look into cattle trace. We need to get serious about that. But secure beef supply plans, they need to have it. In the state of Kansas, I think other states have adopted it, but I think even USDA, we've got a stop movement order where we'll stop movement of animals. So at least in Kansas, that movement won't get going again without the permitting process. You can't get a permit without a secure beef supply plan, a contingency plan, continuity plan. But I said it, Liz, on Tuesday, and I don't know if it resonated. It doesn't matter, I'll say it again, but my firm feeling is none of us are safe until all of us are safe, and none of us are prepared until all of us are prepared. So it does no good if I've got my place all locked up really perfect, which is impossible, but if I'm really perfect, but the guy down the road doesn't take the seriousness to it and put in those best practices on secure beef, I mean, it ain't gonna. And so it's hard for us, our independent nature of our business, that we think we're independent, but we are all connected together. The markets connect us all together. Our export partners connect us all together. We are all part of one supply chain. But that too is a foreign thought to a lot of people.
The next question is, if you had to prepare your company for devastating disease prevention, where do you start?
Secure beef supply plan. We must do that. That is number one. Then number two is, and I haven't got to that point here, but our, if you will, our crisis communication plan. How are we gonna handle that? And that can be applied to all different type of crises, but the communication with our employees and, the local media, they're gonna be going nuts, and we can't be distracted by that. We need to be in the focus of saving lives. But number one is secure beef supply plan. And I can't stress this enough. If you go and try to help somebody create a secure beef supply plan, you are gonna get absolutely nowhere until you can walk that person across that threshold in that door and say, oh, you're not talking about normal, that you're talking about the shit's happening. Danelle has said, Becca Weedle has said it many times, and I love her saying, is it's gonna suck. It's gonna suck when this happens. The secure beef supply plan has helped it make it suck less. But you are gonna get nowhere with the producers until they walk across that threshold and realize, oh, okay, this is war, then it's game on. So internally here, spend time thinking about that. Annually, every year, I'm gonna give kudos. I hope we got somebody on here from KDA, but I love KDA. I'm so proud to be part of the Kansas Department of Ag. They are really leading it, and how we work together, industry, and how they work with us to support us. I feel so good that they're in charge and they're doing what they're doing. But to work with KDA on their Kansas Department of Ag, when they do their exercises once a year, for us, it's a good time for us to pause and think about the what ifs and what could happen and how we would prepare for those things. And so you gotta be intentional about it, my opinion. Take it or leave it.
No, great. There's great comments. And I think from our webinar on Tuesday, it was really apparent how important KDA and the industry in Kansas work together. So I thought that was a great webinar on Tuesday. Next question is, how close is your feed yard to dairy and or swine farms?
You know, dairy, our closest one, they could be across the road, but if I look at the places that I have here, I'd say the closest would be 3-4 miles to a dairy. Swine, there's not many swine operations right here in this part of this. I mean, there are, just not close to our feed yard. So 3 to 4 miles would be the closest that my feed yard set to a dairy.
And then just focusing on feed yard industry, what would you suggest for improving FAD awareness and preparedness most efficiently?
God dang, that's the billion-dollar question. I don't know, because those who don't know, and this will be the third time I brought up, and maybe it'll be the last time, but the initiative I'm part of is the U.S. Cattle Trace Initiative. It is really hard to get people to think this disease preparedness traceability because it's a foreign thought. And that's not what you're asking. You're asking what's the most efficient way. And I promise you, if I knew that we would be all over that from a cattle trace standpoint to drive traceability in the feeder cattle population. I don't know. I don't know. We need to get some good marketer because the risk is real. There's $400, and that's what I don't think people understand. Of every animal, live animal that leaves our feed yard, roughly $400 of the value of that animal is attributed to export markets. Just like that. That goes away if we have foreign animal disease. And it went away just like that in whatever year that was, I can't recall, with foot and mouth disease. And it took us 7 years to gain back that dollar amount or that value back into it. So in the blink of an eye, it gets cut in half and it goes away. And I don't think our people are understand in the industry understand that they only get one check for their cattle. They don't get a check for domestic. They don't get a check for export market, but it's one check. It's all together, and they don't understand that goes away if we have a disease outbreak like that. So it's money that just evaporates out of our system.
The next question, how long do you typically have cattle in your yards before they go to the packer?
Yep. The average days would probably be right around 200 days, but it'll range for as short as 80 days perhaps, maybe even 60 days, even that short, to as long as we've celebrated some birthdays here, got across 365 days. but that would be abnormal, but 200 days would be the average days.
Great. Now, this is a really great comment, and thank you for the person, Christine Ellis. I would just like to thank the speaker for being so incredibly candid. This is one of the best webinars I've listened to in a long time. Thank you for your honesty and bringing a huge dose of the real world into this. So kudos, Brandon.
Well, listen, that's my role, is to show you that it goes. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it's real. It is a foreign thought out here, and you're going to be faced with quite a task when the stuff hits the fan, because you just need to know the lay of the land. And please reach out to me. I think Liz will have my contact info. Reach out to me anytime, however I can be a reference or resource for you.
There's another comment, just a comment, excellent presentation. Just thinking about the what ifs of FMD gives me heart palpitations.
Me too.
100%. Even BSE 2004 shut off exports. Yes, they did. Excellent presentation. Not a question, but a tremendous thank you for a really excellent presentation. And the last question I see is, are bison sent to the same yards? Dairy steers?
Yep, I want to answer that question. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll stay on as long as you want to ask questions. But if you need to jump, jump. But before the person said their heart flutters, mine does too. And I'm going to look you in the eye, and the camera try to, and say, it makes mine. How am I going to depopulate Feedyard with 100,000 animals? How? How in the world am I going to do that? We have no plan for that. We have no way of doing that. So, yeah, you talk about making your heart flutter. Mine does too. And our people, are there knuckleheads in the industry? Yes, absolutely. You see those videos, those people treating cattle badly. But the majority of the people that are in this industry is because they care and love animals. Now I'm going to tell them the next day, okay, now you need to go out there and kill all these cattle. The emotional damage that's going to be done on that deal is frightening to me. But I think your question is about bison. None of the feed yards that we have here feed bison. I've been part of an organization where we did feed bison, and we had a lot of bison in the feed yards. So that does occur. Yes, dairy cattle, whether the black and white kind, the straight Holsteins, or the new trend is the beef on dairy. So it's a Holstein mama, but a beef genetics to really try to improve that calf that comes to us. So they're basically a black dairy animal. And so yes, we would, even in our feed yards today, we would have some dairy steers, and whether they're black and white or just all black, and then also, believe it or not, sometimes heifers.
We do have a couple more questions. How would you rate the employee stability in the average feed yard? Is there a high turnover?
You know, I don't know how to benchmark that against anything. I think just in general, no matter what industry you're in, we've kind of went through a period of time here where people are just pretty transient. We go back and look at that chart about the organizational chart, those different departments. Sometimes what you'll see is within a department, you'll have more churning, and that's pretty good indication that the supervisor we need to do some work on that. I don't know if we're necessarily that worse or better than any other segment in rural America. I think the biggest challenge is just availability of people. And we're just having fewer and fewer kids out here in this part, well, everywhere. And so that just makes fewer and fewer people to do that. And then as we get further and further away from the farm, you know, they don't have the old farm boy experience where they were driving a tractor when they were 8 years old or whatever like that. So that, and then I know this doesn't pertain to this crowd necessarily, but the challenges we have out here related to people is just where the heck do you put them? Just housing out here is crazy. It's a challenge in certain parts of rural America.
That's very true. And the other question was, is there an investment in staff training for cattle health, biosecurity, and FAD? Yeah, we're going through that process right now with our consulting veterinarians. As I mentioned at the top, they come in and they do some training, and I think it's better that it comes from the veterinarian. There's any number of us on staff that could potentially do that, but I think it comes better from an accredited veterinarian.
So yes, we'll go through that, and we'll go through, okay, this is our secure beef supply plan, this is how we'll set it up, this is how we'll identify, this is the signs and symptoms that you look for a really bad disease, who are you gonna communicate to? So yes, the veterinarians will lead that charge. And my goal is once a year to be able to have that, for us to really focus in on this type of stuff. And I like to plan it right around, December timeframe when Kansas Department of Ag does their disease exercise. It's a good time to do it for me.
Now, we do have one more question. What are the best ways as a state to engage and encourage our industry partners to participate in meetings we host, like emergency plan updates and exercises that we plan?
I can speak for Kansas Department of Ag, and I can't speak for other states. I can also speak for other agencies within the state of Kansas. It's not everything's good in Kansas, but I'd say a lot of people view Kansas Department of Ag in Kansas as a partner.
Yeah.
They're not somebody that's gonna come in and try to shut them down. They are a partner. They wanna try to create business, support business. So it comes to the type of people that you have and their motive, and the motive of our people are pure, and they wanna come and help us. So it's no different than whatever you do in the world. It's about building relationships and have those relationships with people and build that trust. So that'd be my recommendation, and Kansas Department of Ag, they are pros. If they're on, I hope they are, to hear they are pros.
And we had a great discussion on Tuesday about that, on how they reach out to their stakeholders and let them know all the different agencies in their state that they're doing their exercise, and do a great job. I made a comment that I did one of theirs probably 8 years ago, and I was just impressed at how organized and how many people and how many industries are part of that training or that exercise plan. So I think that's part of it. It's communication, and it's building, relationships with people in your state.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? We do have one more question. Has there been any meetings with Canadian representatives, cattle associations, to get some lessons learned from and how traceability is now conducted?
Yeah, way at the onset of our cattle trace mission, we've met with is it CCA? I think I got the right acronym, but whatever that acronym could have been in, I can't remember. And I can't remember her name, but yeah, we met with her. We met with different places from across the pond, different places that have it, and what would they do? And a lot of them look at us with envy that we get to start with a blank piece of paper. We get to create it in peacetime. Producers create it, what works for producers and also for government, where a lot of the other countries have been forced into it. If my recollection is correct, as I visit with them. So it's in response to a disease outbreak. But as an industry, how in the world do we sit down peacetime, kick our feet back, and try to build something that'll work for all of us?